right, hey nerds. So, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite philosophers, Slavoj Zizek, and he's giving his regular bombastic opinions about consciousness and quantum mechanics from an deliberately, arrogantly just philosophical perspective. It's instead of getting into the science of it. And he's having kind of a respectful debate with Roger Penrose in which they're mostly agreeing about the bizarre aspects of quantum mechanics in relation to the bizarre aspects of consciousness. So let's get into it here.
You know what the state is now, then it tells you what the state is tomorrow, or 10 minutes, or 100 years from now. The trouble is it doesn't. Whatever the deep laws of physics are, they are, as they currently exist, computable. And I had an argument, I still think I believe it, a long time ago, which was when I went to a course, nothing to do with what I was actually doing on mathematical logic. And I learned about Gödel's theorem. And I was extraordinarily impressed by it, because what it said was, if you have a device which acts according to computable laws, then you have a statement which you may construct out of how the machine is made. And that statement, it's asserting its own falsity on the basis of these computable laws. And you can see that what it's doing, it can't be a computable decision. That's the idea. So I formed the view that conscious understanding, which is what enables you to understand why the Gödel's theorem is true, if you like, it depends on knowing not the rules which the system is based on, but knowing why they worked, which means understanding why they only give you truths. It's an amazing thing. You really have to see it to see why this works. But it tells you that your understanding transcends the following of the rules. So the question, what is your understanding?
So you understand the nature of the universe, basically, more than you can understand it. So how can we fully understand the true nature of the universe if we actually understand it more than we think we do? It's almost impossible to understand the bizarre aspects of consciousness, right? Why did I just put my glasses on? All right, let's get back into the clip. Oh yeah, maybe you can see the fireplace behind me there. Okay.
Well, it's something that seems to involve consciousness, because you can say, well, if an object understands something, it must at least be aware of it. So I'm trying to say that the quality of understanding is not computable, and therefore it's something beyond.
Because remember, he said that the theory of reality should be computable, and now he's saying that it's not computable, which means we don't actually understand it, right?
What we understand in current physics. And the claim I'm making that it's what really goes on in the collapse of the wave function.
Slavoj, yes,
Slavoj has
please.
to interject.
Question for Roger. I respect and agree with your big argument that consciousness is not calculable. Your interpretation,
Agreed.
Reference to Gödel's theorem, and so on and so on. But again, nobody will probably like this solution. But you know what's no science behind it, philosophical intuition, is that, yes, it's non-calculable.
If you talk about, was it Husserl, who I mentioned before, who was a major influence on, I think he was an influence on Heidegger, if I remember correctly, but I might be getting that wrong. Basically, his opinion that most philosophers' views are actually just reflections of their personalities, which I think is the same with most people's opinions, really.
But this doesn't necessarily mean that there must be some higher principle, some deeper mind which cannot be calculated. I am more and more convinced that the non-calculability, which involves a certain inconsistency, disparity, and so on, is the thing that maybe gives birth to consciousness.
So maybe uncertainty, perhaps even in relation to quantum mechanics. So the radical uncertainty of quantum mechanics is what gave way to the emergence of consciousness.
It's for me always rooted in something that I cannot but call a malfunctioning of a certain apparatus. You know, it's like another of my backstage maybe jokes. I think all new great things emerge from malfunctioning. For example, a French friend of mine gave me the best theory of French cuisine, that they were doing cheese and they were doing it carelessly and the cheese started to smell bad. And then they said, oh my God, why don't we learn out of this a more exquisite product and so on, bad smelling French cheese or champagne. Something went wrong with wine, with some fermentation. They said, okay, you see what I mean? When things go wrong, I don't think we need a higher dimension. I think that Einstein was here very clear, precisely along the lines outlined now by Roger. He said, and I don't agree with him here, that there is no science without religion. Religion in the sense of trust in some higher natural order that waits there to be discovered and so on and so on. No, my idea is
Yeah, obviously it's an oversimplification to say that science, you can't have science without religion. However, you know, there are obviously similarities, and people have faith in the scientific method and the accuracy of scientific institutions and their findings in the same way that people do with religion. Although, you know, faith claims and religions aren't necessarily testable or been tested, but that doesn't mean anything necessarily in relation to the aspects of consciousness. However, religion, like religion and science, are different, but yes, they are similar.
precisely that if there is a lesson of quantum mechanics in all its versions, is that no, we have to drop this. In this sense, although quantum mechanics, and I hate those guys who do this, is often given some kind of a fake spiritual twist, like, you know, all this instant communication between two particles prove that there is a higher spiritual connection outside time, space, and
Stupid.
so on. I claim that no, quantum mechanics is the only radical materialist theory.
Yes,
As
of course
you-
he likes to be contrarian. And it's interesting, especially in the way he's talking about connect the way that like woo-woo people connect quantum mechanics to like the spiritual connection of particles and that kind of shit. That is a very much materialist vision of reality, because even if you're talking about aspects of quantum mechanics, you're still looking at them from a physicalist or materialist perspective.
you already said, all of you, observation does not mean there is reality, we are somewhere out. The paradox of observation advocated by quantum mechanics is that precisely we are in reality. We are a part of reality.
Right? So how can we possibly accurately observe reality if we are within reality? It reminds me of this famous analogy that a million people have used before, right? Which is, if you're a fish in an ocean, how do you know that you're in water if that's all you've ever known, right? So since we're conscious and within reality as conscious beings, how can we fully understand something that we're inside of? Because you'd have to be able to examine it from an external perspective to really have a full understanding of the true nature of reality.
Are not outside, which is why I will name now somebody whom I respect politically but not philosophically. For me, the worst idealist is Lenin in his materialism and material criticism, where he talks about objective laws, all preemptive. Yes, but where does he stand? From what position does he do this? I think quantum mechanics is deeply materialist because it includes us into reality.
Observation
Yes.
is a red herring, in my view. I mean, many people thought, well, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. Like, basically, that's kind of like a sum up of him agreeing with what Slavoj Zizek just said. Because if you're observing things and you think that gives you an accurate measure of the true nature of reality, then that's a red herring, because we cannot actually trust our observations, because when you're within consciousness in reality as a conscious creature, you cannot, like, it's debatable, of course, but it's nearly impossible to understand the full true nature of reality and consciousness.
Maybe the thing which reduces the state. You see, if you just followed, let's say, following the Schrödinger equation, which tells you if you know what the state is now, quantum state, and that's a well-defined thing, if you know what the state is now, then it tells you what the state is tomorrow, or 10 minutes, or 100 years from now. The trouble is it doesn't. It doesn't follow the Schrödinger equation, because at some point, what's called the collapse of the wave function.
Right, in relation to quantum mechanics. So based on observations of the results of scientific experiments, you can, in theory, you can predict what's going to happen in the future with quantum mechanics in terms of like some action that you're completing. But due to quantum mechanics, you cannot actually predict that due to the collapse of the wave function when you observe something, and then it collapses the state of something being there and almost also not being there simultaneously, and being in two separate places at once. So that makes sense. It's pretty fucking bizarre.
Takes place. Now, people tend to think that's ridiculous. I mean, what do they mean by the collapse of the wave function? So they tend to think it's the observer coming along and looking at it. And this is the fault largely of the terminology used.
Interesting.
That it's sort of an observation.
The big problem for me, I don't have an answer. What must
So
go
Penrose
on?
was actually just criticizing the view that I just expressed. That's an interesting perspective.
Already in quantum reality that pushes it towards collapse.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
All right. Yeah, that was fascinating as usual. And Slavoj Zizek always has bombastic and fascinating opinions. And yeah, that was a fascinating discussion with Slavoj Zizek and Roger Penrose talking about quantum mechanics in relation to bizarre aspects of consciousness. Slavoj Zizek obviously much more from a philosophical perspective, and Roger Penrose obviously from much more of a scientific perspective. But basically their perspectives are extremely similar. Although I don't necessarily think that Roger Penrose thinks that quantum mechanics gave birth to consciousness as Slavoj Zizek does. But yeah, basically, to sum it up, consciousness is fucking weird, man. Quantum mechanics is fucking weird, and so is consciousness. Reality is fucking weird, man.